Hello and good evening. My name is Courtney Acitelli, and I am the Senior Director for UW Impact. That is the UW Alumni Association's Legislative Advocacy Program. It's an election year, as you may have noticed, and part of our mission at UW Impact is to provide voter education resources to the alumni community and beyond. Tonight's event can also be accessed later online as part of the UW Office of the Provost's upcoming series on elections and democracy. We are pleased to be partnering once again with the Center for an Informed Public. This is our fourth event together. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Center for an Informed Public, or the CIP, is an interdisciplinary effort at the University of Washington led by the Information School, Human Centered Design and Engineering, and the School of Law, with collaboration from numerous other university and community partners. It's world-class researchers, labs, thought leaders, and practitioners translate research about misinformation and disinformation into policy and into technology design and curriculum development, and what we're doing tonight, public engagement. I am pleased to be here today with Dr. Mert Can Bayar. He is a postdoctoral fellow here at the CIP who is based in the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering. He studies public opinion and democracy. He focuses on conspiracy theories and evolving attitudes on democracy and autocracy. His approach melds political psychology and comparative political behavior and explores competing understandings of democratic citizenship. With the CIP, he focuses primarily on rapid response research in the election space, which I expect we might hear more about tonight. And in preparation for today, we offered you, our participants, the opportunity to submit questions to Dr. Bayar in advance. Many of you did, and he has shaped tonight's talk around some of the themes that emerged from your submissions. We will also have the opportunity for you to ask additional questions during and following the presentation. Please submit those using the Q&A button at any time, and we will get to as many as time allows. And without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Mert Can Bayar to share his expertise on what we might expect to see in the upcoming political cycle. Welcome, Dr. Bayar.
Thank you, Courtney. Let me share my screen. And thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to all who are here. Today, I'm going to present some of my work and our work at CIP about election rumors, conspiracy theories, and their effects on democracy. So let's start with information as an issue. We all watch the news, follow the news in different platforms, whether it's online or whether it's in a different platform. We always see crises happening that are surrounding us in news environments. For instance, the Israel-Palestine conflict is still going on, right? There are protests that are happening all around the university campuses, including our university as well, that are about this conflict, and we always seek information in these issues. Like, do masks work in the COVID information space? Think about that. That was a big question. We always search for answers to those questions that are about maybe conflict, war, elections, pandemics, diseases. Information is key to make sense of world events, global crises and issues, and answering questions of like, what's happening, right? What to trust, what to be skeptical of what to believe. Information is key when it comes to answering, understanding, exploring those issues. So what we did for instance, for the Israel-Palestine conflict a few months back, in the beginning of the crisis, is we tried to look at how this discussion on Israel-Palestine was shaped in one of the platforms that was dominant, was X. And we found, very surprisingly, that there were 7 random influencer accounts, that most of them did not exist 2 years ago, dominating the news environment. And you can see these bubbles, these yellow bubbles represent one tweet at a time. So all those bubbles are one tweet. So there are hundreds, maybe thousands of tweets there. And these are from our 7 random accounts. And they account for 1.6 billion views on X. But vis-a-vis our traditional established news outlets that were the best actually in terms of viewership in that crisis was New York Times, CNN, BBC, Reuters. They account for 100 million views. So think about 1.6 billion views and 100 million views. So the source and also the type of information we got during the first 3 days of the crisis even was quite different than what we would expect. And what kind of information these accounts, these random influencer accounts were posting? Well, they were posting a lot of problematic information, not misinformation per se. Most of the things that they posted were not misinformation maybe, but they were problematic. So that tells us that, you know, we need to classify our information in some way or another. And one way to do that is to think about this as a universe where you have rumors, you have misinformation, you have disinformation, you have conspiracy theories, conspiracies. This is a simplified way of looking at it, but it's one way to think about it. And today I'm going to focus on conspiracy theories and conspiracies a little bit to make sense of what kind of information we are dealing with in online spaces or in offline spaces as well. So what is a conspiracy? What is a conspiracy theory? What are the differences between those two? First, a conspiracy is real, right? It's a secret plot by two or more powerful actors to usurp political or economic power, violate rights, alter bedrock institutions, and these are real events that happened. So for instance, Nazi conspiracy of overtaking Europe, Watergate scandal, Bolshevik conspiracy of overtaking Russian government in 1917. We call that October Revolution. So these things actually happened. But conspiracy theories are just attempts to explain the ultimate causes of significant social political events with claims of secret plots by powerful and malevolent actors, right? So I always want to tell that there are three key definitive features of a conspiracy theory. First, you need to rely on powerful and evil forces to explain. Second, these forces need to plot against the good people. The good people, who the good people are, depends on who you are. And these plots should be secretive. Excuse me. So, for instance, one very popular conspiracy theory that 50 to 60, 70% of Americans believe is that the JFK-related conspiracy theories. So, CIA killed JFK is one of those conspiracy theories. It's not the only one, but conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination are very popular. And sometimes these type of conspiracy theories can be believed by majorities of populations, right? So what makes conspiracy theories special? Why do we focus on conspiracy theories a little bit more than, for instance, let's say misinformation? So first thing that we know is that 30 years of research, empirical research especially, on conspiracy theories tells us something that is very established as a finding, that conspiracy theories are not just individual beliefs, they are part of a belief system. So they rely on some sort of a fixed reasoning or a mindset, what we can call conspiracy thinking, conspiracy mindset, conspiratorial thinking. It explains the source of the change in history, right? And it does it by relying on secret plots and malevolent actors. So you have something like French Revolution, where historians of all different types of history, literatures, depends on a lot of different things to explain the causes of the events. Marxist scholars think about social class conflict. Non-Marxist scholars think about the incompetence of the ancien regime, the French monarchy. You think about the three estates and their conflict in late 18th century France. You can write thousands of articles, and that are actually written thousands of articles about this. But for a conspiracy theory, it's the Illuminati. Right? It's the Illuminati that caused the French Revolution. So socialism, very similarly, Industrial Revolution, urbanization, alienation of mass populations in Western Europe causes socialism to be an issue for the working classes that were existing, that didn't exist like in 17th, 18th century, but it started to exist in 20th century, 19th century. But for conspiracy thinking, for conspiracy theories, it's the Freemasons that causes socialism to occur. Pandemic, think about COVID-19, right? It's such an incredibly complicated virus. It has a family from the coronavirus viruses, and it has so much interesting genome things, how it's the cause and the origins of the virus is highly disputed. But for the conspiracy theories, it's the pandemic, right? It's everything is planned. There's no uncertainty about it. So, well, then we ask the question, are conspiracy theories wrong? Like, right? You asked a lot of questions to us about like, how are we going to deal with this junk? Well, let's think about it not as a junk for a while. And I don't like to call conspiracy theories junk because they're not categorically wrong, right? There are some conspiracy theories that are actually come true. For instance, the Russian interference in the 2016 US elections was a conspiracy theory before the Mueller reports. But it became a conspiracy because after the Mueller report released, because we had enough evidence to conclude that this was really happening. So some conspiracy theories can come true. And some conspiracy theories can blur the water a little bit. So let's think about the origins of COVID-19 for a while. So we had some sort of like 4 established hypotheses in the beginning of 2020 and 2021 that were first the natural origin hypotheses, the market hypotheses also, the bad story, think about that. And we had the argument that conspiracy theorists online were arguing that was the bioweapon. And then we have the leak arguments, the lab leak arguments. It leaked from the Wuhan virology lab, right? So we now know, after 4 years, we now know that the bioweapon argument is refuted largely. We have evidence from many scientific studies that shows that the virus is not lab produced. So conspiracy theories evolved around these findings, and they changed a little bit, and they came to the sense that maybe it might not be a bioweapon, but it might be an accidental derivative leak. So it might actually leak from that virology lab in Wuhan. And you have some validation from high sources, like FBI director talking about it might actually be a lab incident, right? Then you Google it, and I advise you to Google it, actually. It's very messy, so be careful. But you can have something like a New York Times article showing that a CIA report telling us that there is no clear evidence of a lab leak. Then, a few months later, you have the science.org showing you that actually CIA bribed its own COVID-19 origin team to reject the lab leak theory. This is by a whistleblower, by the way. So do not take it as I'm endorsing that. It's by a whistleblower. So what you have is that there's still uncertainty about the origins of the virus. We still don't know for sure what happened. But there is growing evidence for the natural origin market hypotheses. So the scientific, especially the medical scientific data that we have, 99% we are sure that this is the case, but not much medical evidence to support the lab leak hypotheses. And there are some intelligence reports that might actually support this accidental lab leak hypothesis. But this is very important that the conspiracy theories about the origins of COVID-19, there is no good evidence to support a conspiracy that existed for the origins of COVID-19 virus. So that is, sometimes it is very clear, like the US, like the Russian interference in the US election, sometimes it might get messy to refute or to explore a claim by a conspiracy theory or something like that. Because conspiracy theories sometimes, and let's say often, ask good questions, right? But their answers are fixed. So in political science and in a lot of political philosophy, we think about a question that is very established, that is very fundamental, which is who governs, who rules, who has the power in the society. Robert Dahl, a very important political scientist, wrote a whole book about who governs. And most of the time, we don't know, like we have a lot of disputes about who governs, but we have something that we know that it is about competition among political actors. Might be social classes, might be interest groups, political parties, foreign actors, corporations, but we know that self-interested actors are in competition, right? But for conspiracy theories, it's about cooperation, not competition. It's about collusion among the elite. So it's always about secret plots, with malicious intent. So French Revolution or any revolution, economic crises, famines, pandemics, they're always results of secret plots, right? But let me tell you something that is interesting. Not all conspiracy theories are created equal. So we do not look, as scientists, we do not classify them as grounded in reality, detached from reality, as this image shows. We do something else. We ask questions like, well, do people believe in the same conspiracy theories, or is there variance? Do people believe in different conspiracy theories? And what we find is people believe in different conspiracy theories depending on their ideology, depending on their partisan identity, religion, ethnicity. As scientists, social scientists especially, we cannot quantify what conspiracy theory is grounded in reality more than others. But we can classify whether Republicans are more likely to believe some stuff about Joe Biden than Democrats, or Democrats are more likely to believe conspiracy theories about Donald Trump. And, well, it sounds like it might, right? And it is. So I have 12 conspiracy theories here. And some of those descriptions are not intuitive. Some of those are. I'm going to explain what those are in a minute. So for instance, fraud Republicans is a conspiracy theory that is about how Republicans stole 2000, 2004, and 2016 elections. Trump-Russia 2016 is the collusion argument. Trump and Russia colluded in 2016. Holocaust denial is a infamous conspiracy theory about Holocaust being fake or hoax. Post Office 2024 is a pro-democratic conspiracy theory that tells you that, Republicans are going to steal the election with the post office, with the help of the post office in 2024. Trump is a foreign asset is a famous conspiracy theory as well, infamous conspiracy theory as well, that most of the time is associated with Russia. 9/11, government knew about 9/11, right? Birther theory, if you know Birther theory, it's Barack Obama not born in the United States. It was very famous in 2010s. Big Pharma conspiracy theories, for instance, this one is about how Big Pharma invents diseases for their own profit. New World Order is about there's a single secret group controlling the world and governments and ruling the world together. That's a very common conspiracy theory. Deep state, I don't need to tell you. There's a deep state working against Donald Trump within the US government. Fraud 2020 is how Democrats stole 2020 elections by rigging it. And illegal voting there's a lot of illegal voting in the United States. That's the conspiracy theory. And when you look at the numbers, these are the percentages of Democrats and Republicans believing in them. And the blue ones are Democrats and the red ones are Republicans in the sample. And this survey is, by the way, from 2023. And you can find a pattern where Democrats and Republicans both believe in conspiracy theories, but they believe in different conspiracy theories. So we got a lot of questions about, is this a Republican or conservative issue, misinformation or conspiracy theories? Well, it's not, right? Both partisan groups believe in conspiracy theories, but they believe in different conspiracy theories. So one thing to think about, well, you can tell me that, well, Mert, people believe in a lot of things. Why should we care? We might care because these beliefs can increase people's attitudes or change people's attitudes toward democracy and autocracy. It might change the way that people participate in politics or the level of participation in politics. And we can discover those through using surveys. So what I'm going to show you here is I was interested in, when I was doing the survey, I was interested in how, if people who believe in conspiracy theories are more likely to support a more stronger, more powerful presidency. Because I was studying democratic erosion, and in 21st century, what we see is democratic erosion often occurs through the expansion of the executive power, so giving more power to the president. So one of the items here that we showed people, our respondents, is that, do you want the president to change electoral laws even if it's against the interest of the opposing parties? Right? If they say yes, if they are likely, if they're agreeing with this statement, we say that there is erosion of democratic norms. It's less democratic. And one of the examples here, also very crucial example, that would you like the president to run for a third or fourth term, even though the constitution limits their term to 2? This is one of the ways that a lot of democracies worldwide eroded by extending term limits. So this was why I wanted to understand how if American public is accepted of, or they do tolerate these kind of expansion of power when it comes to presidents. So what we find is this, and I'm going to explain what this graph shows you, so don't worry. We have our conspiracy theories here, and the ones that are blue are Democratic conspiracy theories. The ones that are red are about Republican conspiracy theories. And the ones that are gray are conspiracy theories that we can't say partisan, but we can call them non-partisan because both Democrats and Republicans believe them in some level or form. So what this graph tells us that, for instance, if someone believes that the Holocaust is a hoax, they are 15% more likely to support giving more power to the president. For instance, if a Democrat thinks that Republicans stole 2000 elections, 2004 and 16 elections, they're more likely 10, 12, 13% more likely to give President Biden more powers to defeat to defeat that kind of evil Republicans in the minds of the voters, right? If they believe that they're capable of stealing all those elections, and vice versa. Think about this: if someone believes that there's a deep state working against an elected president, they're 11% more likely to support giving probably President Trump more powers to fight the establishment, right? This is how you interpret this kind of graph. So these lines are showing us how confident we are. So don't worry about them. I'll explain when we need to worry about them in a minute. Let's look at something else. So right now we know these conspiracy theories lead people to be more tolerant of expanding presidential power. So that's an important thing. But we don't know whether people's understanding of democracy changes. The way that they understand democracy changes. So that's why we are looking at, I wanted to look at how authoritarianism is related to these conspiracy beliefs. For instance, what I did was looking at right-wing authoritarianism. What our country really needs is a strong, determined leader who will crush evil and take us back to our true path. And another example from these items in the survey, if people wanted to have a strong leader in government and they thought that this was a good idea for the US, even if the leader bends the rules to get things done. Right? So I wanted to understand how these beliefs about evil forces, working against your party, working against your government, your leader, is correlated with these kind of things. Should we give more power to our leaders if they're fighting against malevolent actors who are doing malicious things? And looks like it is. Looks like it is, especially for Republicans, which is not surprising because it's a right-wing authoritarianism scale. And I'm going to talk about the left-wing authoritarianism scale and how it might look like here. So for instance here, if someone believes that there's a deep state, they are 12% more likely, more or less 12% more likely to support an authoritarian leader, to bend the rules, in their fight against the deep state. And for Democrats as well, even though this is a right-wing scale, and most Democrats identify either as centrist or leftist, right? Even it's a right-wing scale. If they believe Republicans are going after the elections and election integrity, right? These two items is about Republicans stealing elections, those claims. They are 7, 6, 7, 8% more likely to support a strong leader who can bend the rules and fight against people, the other parties stealing elections. Okay, so these tell us a lot. But in our survey, we didn't have enough time to do a left-wing authoritarianism scale. But when we have a left-wing authoritarianism scale, particularly tailored for a left-wing audience, you might see a switch and moving like these blue conspiracy theories and their associations might move a little bit higher in terms of the scale. So they might make people more likely to support left-wing authoritarianism. And you can see the Republican conspiracy theories less associated with left-wing authoritarianism. So you might see that just in case, so we have a little bit more objectivity in terms of how we approach this scale. So right now we know that conspiracy theory beliefs make people more likely to support a stronger executive. They change the way that people think about democracy and they make it more authoritarian. The way that people think about democracy is more authoritarian. But we don't know if people prefer democracy as a political regime, right? Or do they want something else? So we have a scale here that is very basic, that asks people whether, would you like a democratic political system? Or do you want a system that is, run by experts, not the elected government, to make decisions and do it for the best of the country? Or would you like the army rule, right? That kind of thing. Which one would you like? What we see here is a negative effect now. So less support for democracy in most of the conspiracy theories. So these 10 conspiracy theories are negatively associated with support for democracy. What does that mean? For instance, if someone believes that there are millions of illegal immigrants voting in the United States, they are 9% less likely to support democracy, right? Because the system is rigged. So democracy is rigged. It doesn't work for us. So why should we have a democratic government? It doesn't make sense. So that might be the mechanism where you're thinking about it. But think about the democratic conspiracy theories that are also significant. Here you have the post office and the fraud Republicans. Both Republicans are stealing the election conspiracy theories that are also negatively associated with support for democracy. So they make people less likely to support democracy. But these two, we can't say the same thing because they're touching the zero line. When something touches the zero line in these kind of graphs, we can't say that they are significantly different. So we can't say these beliefs about Trump are actually associated with support for democracy. They're not associated with support for democracy. So they do not change how people think about democracy, which is a good thing. So when we can actually group these conspiracy theories depending on, let's go back, like these 4 are democratic conspiracy theories, and these 4 here, the red ones, are Republican conspiracy theories, and the others are a little bit nonpartisan. So we can group them and see how they relate to participation. And this might actually explain why politicians from left and right rely on conspiracy theories to do politics, to make their own political platform, because they make people participate in politics more. So a Democrat believing in democratic conspiracy theories or a Republican believing in Republican conspiracy theories, they are 10% more likely to vote, to donate, to campaign, to volunteer. But this effect is not there if they believe in Holocaust denial, if they believe in New World Order, if they believe in Big Pharma, right? Those are not making people more likely to vote, right? Because in Holocaust denial, in New World Order, in Big Pharma, the enemy is not partisan. But in Democratic and Republican conspiracy theories, you can defeat the evil by voting, by donating in elections, right? So the partisan notion makes people more likely to participate. So again, conspiracy theories here, depending on the implications in politics, are not a uniform group. There are patterns as well as nuances. And it requires us to understand conspiracy theories, their causes, their correlations, their consequences, and their remedies. It requires us to detect the pattern as well as the nuance. So partisan conspiracy theories increase participation, but that is at the expense of democratic norms. They erode citizens' support for democracy, both democratic and most of the democratic and Republican conspiracy theories. They increase support for autocratic, authoritarian practices, policies. They increase support for a more powerful executive president or prime minister in different contexts. So this is how democracies erode, actually, by public support. So you can see that even in this type of data. But I'll tell you something that is a little bit going to go against probably most of your thinking about conspiracy theories. Well, how are we going to deal with all these conspiracy theories that are bad for the society? Well, let me tell you something. They're bad for the society, but understanding conspiracy theories requires us to understand why people believe in them. And politically, historically, people may have legitimate reasons to be skeptical of institutions. So this figure, this map, is from CIA's plan in 1953 to do a coup in Iran. Right. So think about all the actions that those two big powers, Soviet Union and US, took during the Cold War. And they treated the whole world as a battleground for assassinations, for changing the regimes of elected governments in Latin America, in Middle East, in Asia, in Africa. They played like a risk game in the world, right? So people in the US have legitimate reasons to be skeptical of their own institutions, right? This skepticism can turn and transfer into distrust in the system, the whole political system. So elections as a process and also as an institution can be affected by this distrust or disillusionment in the political system. Even though elections are fair and square in the United States and we don't have any systemic evidence of fraud in the recent elections, right? But this disillusionment and distrust of elections or of the political system can transfer into distrusting elections as a whole. And digital media, influencers, online personalities builds into this skepticism and this distrust, and they boost election rumoring, election conspiracy theories based on all that skepticism and distrust in the public. So the issue is not just about conspiracy theories or misinformation or rumor. It's about understanding why people might have issues and distrust and this skepticism. So our work relies on this type of understanding the pattern and nuance. And we limit our scope in Center for an Informed Public in terms of approaching 2020 elections, 2022 elections, and we'll do a similar approach in 2024 elections, is that we are interested in rumors about election integrity. We are limiting our scope to that. Anything that is about election processes, results, administration, and we are largely focusing on false claims that undermine the trust in elections. Because those are the ones that matter. Those are the ones that we can solve. If we can convince people of those, we can create more trust in an election where the elections are fair and square. So at the same time, we are trying to explain patterns and nuances to the public, to media, to election officials, to online audiences, and democratic society as well. We try to understand, look, this rumor is repeating. We saw similar stuff in these elections. but there's something new as well. So for instance, the blog post that we wrote, a boosted video resonates with border crisis and rigged election frames. We saw something that was similar, but we also saw something that was new because the border crisis got very big in the last 2-3 years. It wasn't there in 2020. It wasn't this big in 2020. But right now we are seeing more rumoring and conspiracy theories about the border because the crisis is getting bigger. So there's something nuance in there, right? So we approach it as a complex issue. It is a complex issue. And we want to understand how different narratives are merging, how they are being taught and spread in online spaces. And in 4.4, and we'll have more discussions hopefully about 2024 elections, but we have seen in the last few months, we have seen false claims about non-citizen voting related to the border crisis and rigged election frames. So how Democrats are going to steal the 2024 elections by relying on illegal voting. So that's a false claim that we see a lot. And false claims of mail-in ballots can come a little bit later when mail-in voting starts. And around election day and after, we might see repeat rumors that we have seen in different elections in history about voting machines and how they're rigged, and there are some glitches in voting machines changing votes. Those kind of rumors we can see. So we are working on preparing on those false claims and in CIP. So one more thing to say that I'm going to say before I open that conversation to everyone is that what is new in 2024 is that digital media environment is a little bit different. Not a little bit, actually, a little bit, not a little bit, a lot different. We have more fragmentation in terms of platforms. We have Thread, we have X, we have Mastodon, Blue Sky, we have Truth Social, we have YouTube. TikTok is increasing in its importance in election space. So we see more fragmentation where we get our information. We also see an approach change in platforms and how they approach content moderation and misinformation. So that's also important to keep in mind when it comes to the upcoming elections. So with that, I would like to thank you. And if you want to follow our work at CIP, please go cip.uw.edu. And if you want to follow me, here's my Blue Sky and my X account. And with that, I would like to thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions and Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. I saw your social media handles pop up and I thought, oh my gosh, you're navigating this too. And in the scary world of social media and what's out there. And the first question that I have for you that was submitted from an audience member is, news organizations, you just talked about where people get their information. News organizations choose what to report, what to ignore, what to include, what to exclude, what headlines, how to display things, what pictures are with them. Is there, self-censorship or editing? Is this effectively misinformation? How do people discern, depending on what source they're in, if what they're getting is real and whether or not it's influencing, their thoughts on a particular subject?
Courtney, that's a great question. And what we always think in terms of the source is that don't look for a perfect source when you're trying to find information. So the sources have their own biases, right? New York Times have their own biases, Fox News have their own biases. So our job as information consumers is not to find a perfect source for every information. Our job is to be informed, I think, about the sources and their possible biases, and navigate around an environment where everyone has their own opinions. So I think that's very important, that, to keep in mind that we have our own biases, media have their own biases, and it's very important to keep in mind is that media in 20th century, and also before the digital media started to become a thing, was a gatekeeper of information, right? They chose what to report, they chose what not to report, and sometimes that some of those might be political decisions, some of those editorial decisions. Um, but right now, what we see with the digital media is that we are losing those gatekeepers. So we have more freedom in the sense of what information we are getting. Is that a good thing? Well, it depends, because we are getting a lot of information that might be problematic as well. So that editorial edits, the editorial cuts, gatekeeping actually shows you and also protects information consumers from a lot of content that might be problematic. Right now, we don't have that kind of a gatekeeping process. So it is good and bad at the same time. You might get a lot of violence, a lot of different types of problematic information at the same time.
Thank you for that. We have a quick question from an audience member, which is, when you talked about extending term limits, is that explicitly in the context of Biden or Trump, or is it regarding presidents or leaders more generally?
For that survey, I wanted to put it vaguely so that people think about it the way that they want to think about it. So there wasn't a specific mention of President Biden or President Trump. So they answered it as like, should presidents have more power kind of context. Yeah, but that's a great question.
It is. And we also have, as you might imagine, a very timely question about what's happening right now with Gaza. So there's a lot of rapidly developing news and information about ongoing campus protests, the war in Gaza, and other crises. How can we make sense and understand about what we're seeing in our feeds and what's being shared may not be reliable, right? Depending on who's sharing it. And it may give a partial or unclear picture of what's actually going on. Are there any unbiased sources? How do people sort through?
That's a great question, very timely question. And it is, again, there's no perfect source. Nowhere you can find perfect sources, but there might be sources that might be a little bit better than others. But I'm not going to name names, right? Everyone can make their own minds. But what we see in these kind of situations and what we saw in the first 3 days of this Gaza war after October 7th was a lot of the random influencers were fighting for attention of people, right? They were trying to get our attention. They were posting every 3-4 minutes about a video, a new bombing, a new attack, something new. So it was very rapid. And a lot of established news accounts like CNN, BBC, they cannot race with that. They have their own gatekeeping processes, right? They have an internal process of validating sources, validating information. That takes time. But a lot of the sources, what we saw in that place, in that context, was whenever they have the information, they release it. They release it without any verification, without any vetting of the information. So what we call those accounts are the news broker accounts. So they broke news, right? Without vetting, without verifying them. So it's very rapid. They account for 1.6 billion views in the first 3 days, right? Thousands of tweets. You can see very similar things that are happening right now on X or different platforms. You can see similar accounts giving you information, more information than probably you need at the time. So what would be the best thing to do is slowing down a little bit when there's a crisis. Do not try to make up your mind with all those tweets that are happening in an hour. Try to find verifiable information. Try to think about sources. When there's a tweet, when there's a video about some issue, try to find verification online. You can investigate yourself. Go to sources that you trust and find out information in a slower pace, right? Because in the rapid environment, most of those information that you get is emotional. And most of the crises we are dealing with are also emotional. Like, people have a lot of strong opinions about what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza. Those are not emotion-free contexts. So it a little bit slowing down. Not, I'm not saying do not get informed, but slowing down, I think helps.
Thank you. We have another question here. You noted false claims of non-citizen voting. There are some jurisdictions, such as San Francisco, that allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. So non-citizen voting occurs in some local jurisdictions. Is there any evidence to say that this is something that could be allowed federally? Is there any, it's non-citizen voting is happening. How would you answer that question?
Well, so it is very few places. I think two or three places, municipalities allow non-citizens to vote, and they're highly contested. Some of those are still in court. So those are processes that local authorities can decide themselves, and it's a democratic process. So what they want to do, if the majority wants to do something, they can do it. But the falseness of the claim is that these claims are not about local elections. These claims are about state and federal elections. So at the time, right now, there is no jurisdiction, there's no law allowing non-citizens to vote in presidential elections, in state elections. But the claims that we are seeing is about, oh, if they have a driver license, they can vote. If they can register, if they have a social security number, they can vote, right? So those are false claims that we see all the time, and they're mostly about federal and state elections, which are, there is no way that they can vote in those elections in the US right now.
I have a simple but giant question that came through, which is, you touched on this briefly in your talk. Is there evidence that 2024 will be worse than 2020 was when it comes to misinformation? Or do you think we may have the tools now to combat it?
That's a great question. We don't know if it's gonna happen. If it's gonna be worse than 2020 or 2024, it might depend on who wins. I'm not gonna comment on that more. And also, it might depend on, as I told you about the platform's approach, it might depend on platforms' decisions on content moderation. And what we see in unfortunately, what we see is that there is way less content moderation in a lot of platforms. So it actually, if things go in similar way to 2020, we might see more misinformation online about election processes. Yeah.
That leads me to a question that's been asked several times in different ways. So I'm going to try to take a bunch of folks who submitted this question in different ways and put it into one filter here. What would you do? How do you respond when you hear a conspiracy theory? What is there any way to debunk it? Is there any way to have a civil conversation around a conspiracy theory? Are there platforms that maybe allow folks to see conspiracy theories in a different light? What happens when you hear something that you
Yeah.
believe to be patently false, right?
Right. So this is a question that is like $1 million worth. If someone has an answer, well, go get it, go get your Nobel Prize kind of question. But we have some answers about like, which techniques work better. There are debunking, pre-bunking, correction literature. Sometimes they're successful a little bit. Most of the time they are not. And it is because I told you about the complexity of the issue. It's not just about one belief. It's about a whole bunch of beliefs and mindset surrounding an issue, multiple issues. And sometimes you can correct one belief, but well, they have 99 more beliefs about that. So what are you going to do with those 99 beliefs? What we are trying to understand and change is not the belief itself. It's its implications. So I'm not sure whether someone wants to believe in deep state, they can believe it. But if they have it, if it has connections and correlations with democratic erosion, authoritarianism, that's where I get a little bit like, okay, this is interesting. So what we are trying to solve is not the belief itself, it's not the conspiracy belief itself, but what it's related to. And it is related to trust, it's related to a lot of things like ideology, and those are things that you can't solve by just correcting one belief. So that's why it's a very big problem.
Related. So you noted just now that this is, you're combating not just one belief, but a systemic sort of series of beliefs that might be within a person or a group, right? So those formed somewhere, were solidified somewhere along the line, maybe as young people, right? Some of our viewers want to know, is there anything that we can be doing maybe in the middle and the high school levels to start helping these students who just have floods of information coming at them, so much more than so many of us did when we were growing up? Is there anything we can be doing to stem the tide of misinformation and disinformation in the younger ages, so maybe those belief systems don't take hold and threaten democracy?
Right.
That's just a tiny question for you.
Yeah. So let me note here is that, misinformation online is not a problem in terms of a single generation. It's not a youth problem. It's a problem for everyone. So everyone is, no one is immune to this problem. But for the misinformation in youth, for instance, in Center for an Informed Public, we have a Misinfo Day, where we invite high school teachers and high school students every year, and to do media literacy events and activities and games and all those things. And we want to, create some sort of tools, give people and young people some tools where they can navigate the online space themselves. We can't convince people what to believe, what not to believe, and that's not our job. But what we can do is to give tools to people, young people, on how to navigate the online space and how to find reliable information on online spaces. And we're trying to do that with the Misinfo Day. And you can go to our website, and I think there might be a link coming to find out about that event as well.
Thank you. That's great. When we're thinking about how people distill and understand the sorts of information, when the CIP looks at what they term to be misinformation, disinformation, or conspiracy theories, how do they decide? That's something that we have a lot of folks asking right now, both in the chat and before. How do you decide what is categorized as misinformation or disinformation? Is it you can't find any other underlying evidence for it, and it's been, or is it one study? Is it 12 studies? How do you actually categorize that? One person may think is misinformation or disinformation. Another person may feel that they have a real viable claim to whatever that is. Some folks may say that this is the democratic process. Some people may say it's not civil. How do you decide?
Well, that's a great question, and it is a lot of uncertainty. What we are doing is dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and during the time where we discover rumors, there is sometimes no fact checks about whether it's true or false. But the scope of the work that we are doing, that's why it's important, because we limit our scope to election integrity process and claims about election administration results. And we necessarily do not make our minds right away, whether it's misinformation or information. We think about, is it worthy of our attention as the center? Is it something that is about, is this something that is about inside of our scope? If it's in our scope, we start working on how it's spreading, how it's being solidified or boosted in different accounts. We try to understand which accounts are involved in this boosting, but we do not make our minds right away in terms of the actuality or factuality of the claim, because that comes a little bit later. But we decide if it's worth investigating or not.
In the same vein, we have some questions around does the Center for an Informed Public actually come out against things? Are there things that the Center for an Informed Public would say, you know what, we've identified this and this is just absolutely patently false? Would you ever come out against maybe a platform or a product or something if you knew that it were spreading disinformation, misinformation, or conspiracy theories?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in a different sense. We are all scientists, and in science, everything is probabilistic, right? We are not sure something, we cannot prove anything in science. That's very common in science. So we are a little bit, we don't do 100% statements. We do probabilistic statements that look for, well, right now with the evidence we have, with the data we have, this is the assessment of the team, but we are not trying to fact check things that much, because fact checking is a huge job in itself. What we are trying to do is trying to give perspective and nuance and patterns in these rumors. So it's a little bit of a different job, but we rely on journalistic fact checking a lot. So that's very important. But our job is not to decide what is true or false, but is to decide how things are moving in election space.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that does it. I think we could probably be here all day. This was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for your time. This is just critical information as we go into this election season. We are going to have to refer back to this. I'm so glad it's recorded. I myself am going to use it as a resource. Attendees, I hope you will keep your eye out for additional content from UW Impact, the Center for an Informed Public, and the Office of the Provost as we push deeper into election season. Our closing slideshow will include some helpful links to learn more. And I hope everyone has a good evening. Again, thank you, Dr. Bayar. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.